All right, once again, I'm sitting here with my brother, Chief Abdiel Ben Levy, also known as Zion Lexx, a teacher and a scholar indeed. So what brings us so soon back together? We usually don't do videos this close to each other, but there were a couple of things that we had to discuss, couple of things that came up that we have to discuss. Our last video is still doing pretty well on the internet. We steaming on the internet, on Facebook especially. And a lot of people really like the information that you brought forth, a lot of new information, things that scholars do.
That's right.
No, they bring forth information that's relevant to the times and the seasons that we live in, and I thought that information that you brought forth was pertinent, definitely for that time. So now, I'm gonna just mention a name, and you just, cause I seen a video with Garfield, where he was standing there with Daniela, and he's going into a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, Garfield's been, after a while, it becomes pathetic when all you could do is talk about one man, and you continue to just try to drag that man's works through the mud. His name, right. His name through the mud. And he's having a discussion with brother priest Daniela. But yes, he goes into talking about Zion Lexx. He can't stop talking about Zion Lexx. So do you care to address that?
First and foremost, let me say, giving all honor and praise to the God of our ancient forefathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a blessing, Chief, to stand here or sit here with you once again. To recap briefly, we've been steaming the internet the last week, and I put emphasis on we because the information that I came across came from a dialogue that both you and I were involved in. So this wasn't a Lone Ranger type thing where, you know, I'm so big that the creator is only speaking through me. The creator moves through the multiplicity of men who are inspired by him. Right, so we came to these conclusions together, and it just so happened that I was able to put it together in such a way that we could present it to the people. But I want to make it clear to the people that the steam that you felt in the last week over the video that we put out, that was something that we did joint together, and I want to give praise to the creator for that. Now, talking about this guy Garfield, man, I mean, you know, in a sense I get it, but then in my right frame of mind I say, nah, I don't get it. And what I mean by that is that most people who don't have a steady niche, if you will, for lack of a better term, to keep them relevant, must continually bring up the thing that made them irrelevant initially. Everybody already knows. Nobody heard about Brother Garfield until he beat the war drums and came on Son of the TV and said that my book, which I will take the opportunity to promote, Ancient Kemet on Trial, was a plagiarization of this book, Egyptian Civilization, its Sumerian origin, real chronology, and the Sumerian origin of the hieroglyphs. Now, this is what brought Garfield to the conscious community platform. Nobody wanted to hear this guy. He was great in his lane as a person who spoke about credit repair, because that's what he does. And even I supported that. I watched a couple of the shows. I didn't agree with every avenue that he took it, because one of the foremost people here in New York City that does that is another Jamaican brother by the name of Squeeze Anarchy. And he's usually on 93.5. Let me shout out him because he's actually the one that inspired Garfield to do what he does, and Garfield doesn't give him credit. So let me take the time to shout out Squeeze from Link Up Radio 93.5. And he's the one that pretty much spearheaded in the community in our era, speaking about credit repair and going out and doing it on a large scale. He also had a magazine in the early 2000s called Jamrock Magazine, which a lot of reggae artists helped him to push. So I want to give credit where credit is due and shout out our brother Squeeze Anarchy from Link Up Radio. With that being said, I have some history with Garfield. You know, I know him from our involvement behind the scenes in dancehall reggae. Him as a promoter and me as a manager for several artists in the reggae industry. So we go back before the conscious community. And I think that Garfield's issue with me is that We come from a similar background, but it seemed as if I had a greater push than him. And sometimes when you're watching somebody that comes from the same arena as you do, the same environment as you do, and you see them making strides that you're not making, you begin to either A, beat up on yourself, or B, you begin to envy the place of that individual. And I think in his case, it is clearly inspired by envy, because when he reintroduced himself to me about 2 years ago at Kemet on Trial, he was all over me. He wanted my phone number. He wanted to link up. The initial videos on starting the channel, he's on there calling me his brother. He know me from the reggae industry, blah, blah, blah. But now it seems that the conscious community has turned against me, and he's found his niche. He's found his way to get in and get the applaud and arouse the people with whatever it is that he's trying to do. But here's the problem with that. Everyone that knows me good and personal will tell you verbatim that we may not agree with everything that Zion Lexx may say or do, but one thing we will tell you is that the brother is a scholar. And I am not saying that about myself. You have witnessed this yourself, as we have both been in places where elders from our community have placed that title and that appellation upon me. So we both recognize that it is not me that is going around talking about I'm a scholar. This is something that the community has placed upon me as a title, right? With that being said, Garfield's newest video is entitled Lions of Israel versus the Dagger Squad. And of course, instead of deal with the Lions of Israel, of which some real lions was there, shout out to Priest Daniela, he decided to use the opportunity to once again bring up the person or the thing that made him relevant in the community.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, brother. Now, you said somebody put their time in to do what, though? To copy somebody else's work and pretend it's yours? That's not work. That's stealing people's information, which is against the laws in the book of the Bible. Thou shalt not steal. So if you steal somebody's information, has he repented to the Hebrew community for taking L.A. Waddell's work? What I'm trying to say is, has he come out in front of the community and said, you know what? I lied about my book. I didn't put any references in my book. I broke actually an ethical law, not the law. He broke mad ethics when it comes to writing. But when you're trying to make a book called Kemet on Trial, you knew exactly what you were doing. You were trying to capitalize, exactly, a pamphlet. You're trying to capitalize on people's emotions. So when Hebrew brothers see a Hebrew brother write a book, you're going to support it because you say, hey, he represents Israel. But when you represent Israel, you got to be on point. You can't break your laws and represent Israel. That's the first thing that he did. He broke the laws.
I'm going to ask you a question, right? In defense of the brother, I'm going to ask you a question. When you say that he stole people's information, talk to me specifically what you're talking about, because I'm looking through Jabari's book and I'm seeing some of the same things. But I'm gonna let you talk.
Hey, and I'm gonna defend Jabari because he's not here. You're gonna have to point out where he didn't quote somebody. Hold on a second before you do it.
Because you talked about the
hold on. No. I'm gonna get you it. You know what? It's your interview at this point.
No. I'm gonna let you rap. One of your biggest criticisms of Zion Lexx was the fact that one of the images that he used, I know that you said you had, either you or Jabari reached out to the person that actually owned the image. So my thing is that these images that are in this book, did he reach out to all these authors and get permission to use all these books? Does he have the right to use all the information in this book?
So of course he wants to question, and I call it bait, brother Priest Daniela, into antagonizing me or possibly showing disdain, disgust, or hatred for me and what I represent. Not only did Daniela not take the bait, but he actually flipped it and reminded Garfield that, hey, you guys were supposed to have a debate. Aren't you running from him? At least that's what I'm hearing, because we all been hearing this. All right. So Garfield responds by getting into my book, and he says that, you know, I owe the conscious community an apology. I owe the organization that I was formerly a part of an apology, and I owe my creator an apology for stealing someone's work and not properly citing it, for quoting someone like Flinders Petrie and not giving them enough credit or namesake to not name him in my book. And also he makes the silly, I mean, this is just ludicrous, that although I scream being pro-black, or i.e. black power, I'm quoting someone who believed in the Aryan origin of civilization. And he's talking about the book Egyptian Civilization, its Sumerian Origin, Real Chronology by L.A. Waddell. L.A. Waddell was certainly known to be an Aryan. He was certainly known to have been someone who believed that both the Egyptians and the Sumerians were Aryan in origin in terms of their race and their creed. But let's stop. The difference between the Hebrew Israelite community and a great bulk of the Kemetic community is something that we all can come to terms with by saying scholarship. What do I mean by that? Did the Kemetic community forget that every single so-called Afrocentric scholar founded their ideas on Egypt being the light of the world on Gerald Massey's book, Egypt, Light of the World? Gerald Massey is not black. Gerald Massey is a European. He is the first person in the late 1800s to speak about Egypt as the origin of civilization and even as the template of the Bible. The Afrocentric scholars that come after him, such as Sheikh Anta Diop, may his memory be blessed, I have a great deal of respect for his work, John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben, these individuals are quoting his works, and all of their books reflect his works. But it goes even further, because James Henry Breasted believes that the Egyptians were not white and black in color, that they were white. He's a person that has authored several Egyptian hieroglyphic or Medunetta dictionaries, of which many of the scholars in the Afrocentric or conscious community quote. Budge was a person that also vehemently believed the Egyptians to be of pure white genes and blood and lineage. So if we're going to honestly critique me for using a European who views ancient African civilizations as originating with people who lack melanin, such as Europeans, then you got to put on trial all of the Grandmaster teachers. And that's all I'm saying. I don't even have a problem with people pointing that out, because I'm a person that I do with scholarship, and the real bottom line is this, and I'll give it to you in two ways. You ever went to a concert of your favorite artist and had the opportunity to get behind stage? This is your favorite artist now. You love all his music. You get up close and personal and a reality hits you. Sometimes when you get real close up on a person, you begin to smell what the Hebrews call as zoak. You know, the lay world would probably say shit. I'm going to just say it as it is. Sometimes when you get up and close and personal to those that you respect, for whatever reason you may respect them, you begin to see things that may draw you back. But does it discredit their contribution and their work? That's another story. Saying all that to say, every black scholar who pushes Kemet is not genuinely in love with black people and wanting and desiring to see them become great as a people, as a nation. Take a page out of Brother Polite's portfolio. He's doing everything but pushing black power at the moment. But he introduced himself in the community selling and pushing what he know the people wanted to take, black power. But right now, you know, he's arguing about whether or not black people should be wearing dashikis, because they're not made in Africa. They're not made by Africans. So how does that represent Africans? So don't criticize me, is what Brother Polite says, when I have on my my Versace, you know, and all these Italian wear. Don't criticize me for that, because none of this was made by black people. So if you're going to criticize me for this, I'm going to criticize you for your dashiki because it doesn't have a black stamp. But we all know that white people ain't wearing dashikis. I mean, you might find a couple, but I mean, it's not associated with them. It's not enough to associate it with white people. So with that being said, I deal with scholarship. And if we're going to deal with scholarship, we do something that's called vetting. We vet our work. We vet the work, or we proof the work that we are scrutinizing, that we are looking at, in order to at least substantiate the hypothesis that is being pushed. And Garfield makes another extremely silly statement. He says in one instance that Brother Zion Lexx, in the 3rd chapter of his book, and I'm glad I brought the book with me because I want people to see that I'm transparent. I don't have nothing to hide, you know. when I presented this work to the community, I presented it in a very honorable fashion. There was nothing dishonorable about the way that I came with this book. So Brother Garfield says, I want you to just hold that for 1 second. Brother Garfield says that the 3rd chapter of my book is a plagiarization of the subtitle of this book. The subtitle of this book is Sumerian Origin of the Egyptian Hieroglyphs. Can you read for us, Chief, the chapter title of my 3rd book?
It reads, The Sumerian Origin of the Hieroglyphs, Metu Neter.
All right. Say that just one more time.
The Sumerian Origin of the Hieroglyphs, Metu Neter.
All right. So here's the problem that I want to point out real quick. Brother Garfield makes an extremely erroneous statement. Before going into a series of pictures that represent books that are actually published and written, I want to make a statement to the conscious community and those who actually vet scholarship and know how scholarship works. No one owns a patent on a hypothesis. Let me say it again. No one holds a patent or a copyright on a hypothesis. For instance, if I come and I say that I believe that man evolved from air or from fire, someone can come along 10 years later and say the same thing. They don't owe me anything. That is not my intellectual property. There are a series of things that do not fall along the lines of plagiarization and copyright, of which I'm going to read off some of them to you. There are many ideas that do not fall in the category of plagiarization or copyright infringement. One of them is a law of nature. For example, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Anybody can say that. That's obvious. That's observable. A rule of human behavior. For example, people in a particular demographic tend to buy the same items. That's observable. Right. That can be formulated or imagined by anyone. No one owns a patent by that. A biological hypothesis. Taking antioxidant supplements makes people healthier. Nobody owns a patent on an hypothesis, something that I said earlier. And the last one is a philosophy or religion. Hence the reason why anybody can go and get a Bible and reprint it. You don't own a copyright on it because it's believed to be the word of God. None of us own a patent on that. Right. The Book of the Dead, nobody owns a patent of it. You can get a hold of the original copies and you can publish them right now. And that's in Kemet. So with that being said, no one owns the patent on a hypothesis. When L.A. Waddell wrote his book, Egyptian Civilization, Its Sumerian Origin and Real Chronology, and he subtitled it The Sumerian Origin of Egyptian Hieroglyphs, this is something that he demonstrates, but this greater community on a whole did not adhere to it, meaning they didn't think that it was enough evidence to be fact. Therefore, it remains a hypothesis, or i.e. a theory. All right? So he doesn't own a patent on it. He cannot have a copyright on this. Anyone can say it. And to prove it, I'm going to do something that just involves a little bit of common sense. For instance, the entire conscious community knows that Sheikh Anta Diop wrote a book entitled The African Origin of Civilization. Right. But guess what you may not know? George Wells Parker wrote a book entitled The African Origin of the Grecian Civilization. Now, why did I even bring us there? Because it has the word Grecian. Everyone knows that the Western world says that the Greeks introduced civilization, and there was no one prior. Right. So if he posits in his book that the Africans originated Greek civilization, then he's also saying the Africans originated civilization. Mm-hmm. Tomato, tomato. All right? But I'll give you a title that's actually more in sync. There's an author called Hermel Hermstein who wrote a book entitled Black Sumer, The African Origins of Civilization. Mm-hmm. He also titled his book, or subtitled his book, The African Origins of Civilization. Let me say it again. Sheikh Anta Diop has a book that is well known in the conscious community. It is entitled The African Origins of Civilization. Hermel Hermstein wrote a book called Black Sumer, The African Origins of Civilization.
Which book was written first?
Which book was written first? And how did Hermel Hermstein or Sheikh Anta Diop get the right to do that? Are they plagiarizing one from the other?
Right.
Well, let's take it a step further. You have another author who is African, and his name is Dr. Muata Ashby. And he wrote a book called The African Origins of Civilization. The exact same titles. So we have already quoted 4 African authors that wrote books directly entitled The African Origin of Civilization. No one owns a patent on a hypothesis. This is why people have to do their homework, and this is why people have to read between the lines and see that at the heart of a lot of the claims that are pursued in the conscious community to bring people down is hate or envy. People desiring to be in the position that they believe you to be, which is an illusion, because in the eyes of the creator of all, we are one. There is no distinction. I don't deem myself greater because I know more Hebrew than my brother. I don't deem myself any less because I don't understand Medu Necha like my other brothers, because I know that the creator is not judging me by any of that. He is judging me by me being in concert with the universe and his laws. That's right. That's simple. So that part has been dispelled. Also, Black Athena, written by Martin Bernal, who, although being European, did several lectures with John Henry Clark. One of the most famous being when they debated Mary Lefkowitz on the idea that the African origin of civilization is superior to the idea of Greek's birth in civilization. Right? So in Black Athena, he subtitles the book, Martin Bernal, The Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization. So in a nutshell, when it comes to Brother Garfield, I want to make this statement very, very clear. Garfield is not an intellectual on a level to have a dialogue with various people. Garfield has never been vetted in the community. The conscious community has been in a state of disarray, and it is a vacuum for who can hold the power. Sarah Sutton Seti has almost been excommunicated from the so-called conscious community. And by so-called, I mean people really look at Black News 102, Sonata Studios, or Sonata TV. No disrespect to him, but it's the truth, as if that is the full spectrum of the conscious community. Yes, we know that Sonata has a patent on the term conscious community with a K, but the proper way to spell it with a C, and it representing the consciousness of melanated people around the globe, he does not own a patent on. So contrary to popular opinion, just because a viewer or Sonata himself pushes a certain idea does not make that idea right. Sonata is not a Necha. Sonata is not a god. Sonata is a man. And those that appear on platforms like that tend to feel like, because there are over 1,500 people in a room at a single moment agreeing with the most pseudo teacher, that, oh, they're right. No, because we know that the majority of the world is deaf, dumb, and blind. Right. That is an absolute fact. So when you got the majority of a group of great people agreeing with you in a time when these same great people are disillusioned by their own wickedness, you want to almost believe that you would probably be one of the greatest proponents of the very wickedness that they are slave to, if they're in agreement with you. Right. I want people to go back and think about what I just said. So in summary, on the Brother Garfield half of this conversation, he's no scholar. The term scholar and Garfield should never be introduced in the same statement. In fact, in the video when he stood up with Lines of Israel recently, he couldn't even pronounce philosophical. Am I lying? You heard it. He said something like philocolosically. Really? It's philosophically. That's what it is.
So I also heard when he was mentioning your book, Sonetta on the side going, oh, pamphlet, right? Yes. But as I could recall, Dr. Ben's first couple of books, how many pages did they have? And they call those books.
One of his books was, I believe, one of Dr. Ben's books was 23 pages. Yeah, about some of the earliest books that Dr. Ben wrote, maybe like the first 3, 4, or 5, were all pamphlets. They were all books that were 70 pages or under. And I think one was like 96. I've written a couple books that are several pages, double, triple the amount that Dr. Ben has in some of his books. Something that I pointed out during my debate with Brother Jabari. And before I forget, I want to make this last point with regard, because I think it's important to mention.
He said that he keeps harping plagiarization.
Right.
He keeps harping plagiarization, but I do recall the discussion that you and him had on the bench,
Right.
on the streets.
That's right.
With Sarnetta being there. I mean, it was so. It went from daytime. I mean, it was the nice setup. They had an antagonist come, or would you say an antagonist? Right. He was an antagonist. Came and
I call him a fall guy.
yeah, the fall guy. He came and he was antagonizing you, and then kind of like to set you up for the fall. And then here came Brother Garfield, and then he starts, and then during that talk, I mean, the conscious community.
Right.
The Hebrew community understood and realized on that day that you destroyed him, that he could not, the claims that he was making did not stand.
It did not stand or stick.
And my question is always, you got scholars like Shaka Utmost, you got brothers like Reggie, although I don't think he's a great debater, I do think that he has a level of scholarship and a level of, right, and a level of intelligence that's brothers like Sharif Bey, brothers like Captain Tazariak, brothers like even Priest Daniela. You got brothers.
Shout out Gorilla Hebrew. He displayed a significant amount of scholarship over the past weekend at the event entitled "The Avengers vs. Kemet." That brother's PowerPoint presentation was powerful on my eye.
So as I go on, you got even brothers like Brother Polite, Ali Muhammad,
Right.
that have seen your book,
Right. Know about the book.
And none of them have jumped out the window.
Right.
Even Unc came
Right. He could have.
from the Amarah squad. I heard him say, "Nah, I don't think the brother plagiarized his book."
Right.
You know what I'm saying? These are known scholars in the community, people that are respected and, like you said, are vetted in the community, right? They have not jumped out the windows, and they still don't jump out the window, publicly at least. You know, publicly at least. But this guy, he continues, and it seems like it's an ongoing thing. And I'm starting to believe that it is a bit of, I don't know, hatred is a strong word, but I can't find anything else that goes with that, because, or envy or jealousy, because it becomes an annoyance after a while, and for someone to keep having to answer the same questions about their book, you know, it really becomes a moot point, because the other scholars are not saying it. No. But there was also something that you said about eugenics, and he mentioned the author. I forget the author's name, that he reads and that he subscribes to. Can you mention that?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely. I'm glad that we're here with dialoguing, because sometimes iron sharpens iron, and you certainly did that. I almost forgot to mention this point. Very poignant and very important point. Brother Garfield continually says when he dialogues with the Hebrews that our sources that we use in a scholarly environment are not scholarly at all. And he invites us to use and reference, or study at least, the sources that he's using. He'll quote people like Strabo, and he'll quote the Roman historian Tacitus.
No, hold it. I'm going to give it right back to you, because I don't want to hog the mic today. I want to ask you again, can you give me a particular source to go to say, where did these Jews go after 70 AD, and where did they go? But this is what I'm going to tell you.
We know why he said that.
We know Strabo documented, we know 1 million Jews. He documented that 1 million Jews actually were in Egypt at the time. I don't discount that. The problem is now, family, I asked the brother for a source. He said Babylon to Timbuktu. I understand his method. His methodology is he's going to use some scholars who document and talk about this. That doesn't make them right. We're talking about primary sources. You'd have to go back to Josephus, who was alive at the time and who documented it. So let's go back to a source that was actually there, right? Strabo, Philo, those people were alive up until 50 AD. All right, Tacitus documented that there was a Jesus. Now, I asked for proof of Jesus existed. He said Tacitus, right? So now, if Tacitus writes about it, and by the way, if you have histories by Tacitus in 5 chapter 5, he says during the time of Jesus, nothing happened. They have that. That's what Tacitus said. Nothing happened.
The first time I heard him say that was a couple months ago. I was saving it for a debate to bring it up or to rebuttal it. To rebuttal the idea that is one of the chief references that he's always mentioned. But apparently Garfield doesn't want to debate Zion Lexx, so maybe I got to jump the gun and talk about it now. Of all historians for Garfield to quote, he quotes the Roman historian Tacitus, and even adds that Zion Lexx is a fraud, people. His book is not scholarship. He's quoting someone who believes that the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians were Aryan or white. Did Brother Garfield tell the community what Tacitus introduced to the modern world back in ancient times? What do I mean by that? The first thing I want to, thank you very much. The first thing I want to take a look at is a book title, because I want to provide sources so people can go and vet and proof exactly what it is that I'm saying. So I'm going to do the diligent deed of presenting information in a way that people can scrutinize it, can go back and take a look at it. There's a book written by Benjamin Isaac, which is entitled The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity. Throughout the book, among the Greco-Roman scribes and historians that the author cites as inventing racism is the pen and person of Tacitus, the Roman historian.
The same one that Garfield.
The same one that Garfield said to Daniela that, he has a better grip on history than Josephus. Now, I want you to check this out. Now, The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity, I want you people to get this book, is by Benjamin Isaac. In the book, he mentions that Tacitus, the Roman historian, is actually one of the people responsible for ushering racism into the ancient world. In other words, the early Greco-Roman writers didn't really pen color prejudice. They certainly formulated some of the ideas in a vicarious way, for lack of a better way of coining it, vicariously, but nonetheless, they didn't outwardly project or evoke color racism in their works. Most of the Greco-Roman writers. But many of them laid the intellectual framework for it. For instance, when the Greeks entered Ethiopia, the people of that region called themselves Cush, and they were known in Kemet as Nubians. The Greeks looked at them and said, Ithops, burnt faces. Now, we know in the Bible, we speak about black being beautiful. Song of Solomon, right? Black is beautiful. In fact, the word Cushi in Hebrew is synonymous with being beautiful in appearance. I already brought that out in a lecture before. So we know that the Bible certainly speaks about black being beautiful. Right. But when the Greeks encountered the Ethiopians who were calling themselves Cush, they called them burnt faces. So the point that I'm making is that although they did not outrightly pen color prejudice, they certainly laid the intellectual foundation for it. Hence, the writing of a book entitled The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity by Benjamin Isaac. Now we are going to fast forward to the Roman historian Tacitus. Tacitus is responsible for a work called Germania. And this is what I meant by they led the intellectual framework for racism. This is why I made that statement. Tacitus began to be disdained by the Roman Empire because he continually spoke and wrote in a very romanticist tone about the emerging barbarian tribes coming out of Germany. As we know, the Roman Empire was taken down by the 10 barbarian tribes, as the book of Daniel states verbatim, literally tells you the 10 horns and names them all. And we know them to be the 10 barbarian tribes that took over Rome. This is a fact of history. So the Bible, contrary to popular opinion, is not myth, it's historical. With that being said, in the work Germania, Tacitus actually speaks about the reason why he believes there will be a shift, paradigm shift and a cultural shift of power from Rome to Germany is because of the purity of the German race. He says in his book, he says purity of the German race is going to be the chief reason why they dominate and ultimately conquer the Romans. So that means he's also giving you some knowledge. As we already know, the Romans are a mixed breed of people. They have a lot of black in them as well. Some of the early Greco-Romans. In fact, there's pictures of Greco-Romans looking as black as some of us. This is a fact. Even though we know them to be a European people on the whole, there were certainly several of them that had black features as well, because a lot of the first world encountered them and mixed with them. And certainly we know that when Alexander conquered Egypt, his soldiers raped the African and the Asiatic world, of which we're talking about two melanated empires, the Afro-Asiatic world. With that being said, in the book Germania, the Roman historian Tacitus makes this statement. He says, the Germans are going to conquer the Romans due to the purity of their race, because he says, when you live in an environment that's extremely cold, two things happen. You become strong and you become wise. You become strong because of the fierceness of Mother Nature, so he says. You have to deal with the elements, so the body becomes robust and big. You become wise because now you have to become a hunter. There aren't animals just hanging out when it's cold. A lot of them are hidden. So in order to find them, capture them, and kill them, evokes more wisdom. So the Roman historian Tacitus notes these things and say that it will contribute on top of the purity of the races as to why they will be superior to every race of people on the face of the earth.
That sounds like something that I heard.
That sounds like a book called Eugenics.
Yeah.
That was written over a millennia later, almost 2 millennia later.
And it sounds like something that a man over there in Germany.
That's right. And we're going to get to that part. It sounds like because you know Hitler was influenced by eugenics. This is a known fact. And he waged war on Jews because they were living according to the culture and heritage of a melanated people, the original Hebrews. Right. And of course he had a problem with us as being blacks, because everyone knows from the point of view of building an empire, the thing that is in your way you must eradicate. Black people cannot exist if white people are to remain on top. Let me say it again. Black people cannot exist if white people are to remain on top. Hence why we see all of the things that are taking place in our era literally to eradicate us. And we must understand that, as many of our scholars have brought out in so many ways, that they are trying to eliminate us as a people. You have to understand, Francis Cress Wessling says that our genes, without us raising a weapon, our genes eradicate white supremacy. We will dominate you in a couple years, period. And they realize that. But here's another thing that he says in the book called Germania. People that live in extremely hot climates tend to be lazy.
Wow.
Tend to not prosper. Wow. Tend to not have unity.
Wow.
What does that sound like? He said that in the book entitled Germania. Now, the author of Eugenics quotes the Roman historian Tacitus throughout his book, Eugenics, and considers the Roman historian Tacitus as the inspiration and chief influence for eugenics. So you mean to tell me, Garfield, you have an issue with me quoting an Aryan scholar on the origin of civilization, because even though he believes it began in Sumer, which we know are a black people, he credits the Sumerians as originally being white. But you don't admit or tell the people that so does Gerald Massey, so does Wallich Budge, so do all of the European Egyptologists. They all believe the people of Egypt, including Flinders Petrie, not to be melanated, but to be of color. But that didn't stop every single major Afrocentric historian in our community from quoting them in their book. This is how we vet scholarship. A person is right when they're right and they're wrong when they're wrong. Just because I quote somebody's book does not automatically make me a patron of all of their ideas. Right. I can quote someone so long as I agree with that which I am quoting. Because I quote you, I don't agree with everything you say. Because you quote me, you certainly don't have to and don't agree with everything I say. Hence why we put it in quotations. Hence why we define a barometer around it. Hence the term quotations. Because if I believed everything you said, I would just speak about how glorious you are. And I wouldn't have to put your words in a definitive barrier and encase it and say, I agree with you here. I would just say, refer to him for everything. Right. You understand? So, Garfield now is the biggest hypocrite in the conscious community. Without any body of work, shout out to Priest Daniela for pointing that out, something that many of us know, but humility causes many of us to allow him room to grow. But when you have a person that is moving with such wickedness, you have to put them in their place. And the Hebrews have been some of the best in the conscious community to sit people down and put them in their place, even as Brother Captain Tazariak correctly referred to Brother Jabari as a comedic Christian, because that's exactly what he is. You know what I mean? Shout out to Captain Tazariak. So with that being said, Garfield has an issue with me quoting an Aryan, someone who believed in the Aryan origin of civilization, L.A. Waddell. L.A. Waddell was influenced by those that believe in that. But guess what, Garfield? You're quoting the guy who is considered the inventor of it, the father of it. You're quoting the Roman historian Tacitus, who was considered one of the chief people in antiquity as inventing racism and laying the intellectual framework for books like eugenics. I almost want to drop the mic on that, but I'm going to pass it to you.
And also, just to make a note, the neo-Nazis and all these groups, they use these concepts.
Yes, they do.
Right? The neo.
Let me say this one thing, please. I apologize. It's very important. What Garfield says in regard to me quoting L.A. Waddell, who is a person that posits that the Sumerians were Aryan in race and the Egyptians were Aryan in race, which we know to be a racist theory, because there's no proof whatsoever to substantiate that. So it's clearly a racist theory. Don't you know that I note that in my book? We're in chapter 5. We're in page 5, chapter 1 of my book, or my pamphlet. It's an excellent pamphlet, by the way. And you know what's gonna be respected on a high level in a couple of years, because you never really get the credit that you deserve in your lifetime. But you know what's going to be highly respected in a couple of years? People are going to look back and they're going to be able to say, in 54 pages, Zion Lexx chin checked the entire conscious community. Right. In 54 pages or less. We're reading, another reason, I'm quoting myself in my book, Ancient Kemet on Trial, another reason why the dynastic theory was rejected, particularly in African scholastic circles, is because the proponents of this theory began to introduce European civilization into the pre-dynastic civilization by whitewashing the Asiatics, who were known to be a people of color, and even go as far as to state that the Greeks and original inhabitants of Asia Minor also contributed to pre-dynastic Egyptian culture. I do not support this last conclusion, simply because racism was at the epicenter of it, and the desire to promote the supremacy of European culture, i.e. white supremacy, by making it the precursor of African culture, when both history and archaeology disagrees with such an unfounded claim. Why didn't he tell the people that page 5 in the first chapter of my book, I tell you that the people who founded the theories that I am introducing to the community were racist. And while I don't have to agree with their racist undertone, I still want to show you what they found. The exact same thing that Dr. Ben, John Henry Clark, Sheikh Anta Diop did. While they did not agree with Gerald Massey that the Egyptians were white, they used his scholarship. While they did not agree with Wallace Budge that the Egyptians are white, they used his scholarship. Because common sense is supposed to be common sense, but apparently it's not that common.